Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education, featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host, Alexis Avila.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. This is your host, Alexis Avila, founder and CEO of Prepped and Polished, tutoring and test preparation in Wellesley. And we also have offices in South Natick and Sudbury. This is podcast number 250. And we're bringing back guest today, Dr. Shirag Shemmassian, who's founder and an admissions consultant of Shemmassian Academic Consulting. As a Cornell University graduate and Cornell admissions interviewer, Shirag knows what the best schools are looking for in prospective students during admissions interviews. On today's episode, Shirag gives you some tips on how students can appeal college rejections. For another related conversation, please go back to episode 152. It was my interview with Shirag, where we talked about evaluating your college application. If you have a question during or after this podcast, just go to our website, preppedandpolished.com, and a chat box will just pop up, and you can type into that. And that actually goes to my phone, and I will see you, and I will get back to your question immediately. So let's get back to my conversation today with Dr. Shirag Shemmassian. I think you're going to learn a lot about how to appeal rejection letters, and you're going to get a lot of really cool info. So enjoy the conversation. Shirag, thanks for coming back on the Prepped and Polished podcast. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm well, Alexis. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing great. So you've been on our show a few times before and really value your knowledge on college admissions. So we'll cover some topics today that I think parents are going to benefit from, and students as well. But can you just remind our audience on how you became a Cornell University admissions interviewer and a nationally known college coach?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give there's sort of the long story, the short story. I'll give the mid story. So I back in the day when I was in high school, we had pretty weak college counseling, to be honest, and but I always wanted to, go to good schools, and I felt like there was always something like behind the curtain. In my high school, there weren't a bunch of students going into, Ivy League schools or Stanford or all these places that I now help students get into. So I was very self-taught with the process and was able to get into Cornell and did very well there. And I was, again, my interest in admissions never sort of died down. I had a lot of people asking me for help. I was helping people get into graduate schools and medical schools and all these different things, and they were having success. And I was like, man, I really like this. And so when I had the opportunity to support Cornell admissions, I jumped on it, and it sort of never stopped, this interest. I still, I was always reading. I still read books on college admissions all the time. I write about it all the time. And just organically, word of mouth, as people were having success and I was enjoying it more and more and writing about it more and more. It happened that way. And here we are now supporting, more students than I did back then, and still, helping people achieve, their educational and career dreams. And there's just so much mystery around this process, what to do, how to do it. People hear rumors, they read a forum, and I think it's really important for us to sort of demystify what's real, what's not, so that people, use their time most effectively and not sort of running around trying to chase after one shiny object after another.
That's awesome. And what types of services do you provide?
Yeah, so we help people get into top colleges. We also specialize in helping people get into medical school. And so the way we do that is, through advising before an application process, as well as application support when it's time for them to actually submit their application. So we're talking, for high school, people come to us various points in 9th, 10th, 11th grade, and they might ask for help with, course selection, extracurricular advising, what to do over the summer, how to get into various prestigious summer programs, things of that nature. And then when senior year rolls around, we help people with, school selection. So, which schools they should apply to, how to write great essays, brainstorming topics, editing them. And then, of course, if people don't get into the place they were really hoping, we help with waitlist letter prep, appeal letter prep, which we're going to chat about a lot today. So yeah, really comprehensive college admission support.
It's awesome. And can you work with students remotely? So I know you're in New York, right?
No,
You're
I actually
we
live in
move?
San Diego. Yeah. Uh, the other New
I
York.
guess Cornell and
Yeah, yeah, no, it's
um,
I
even
grew up.
better. So you can answer the question if we can work with you in the
Yeah,
East.
yeah. So I grew up in LA, and I
That's
went
right.
to the least LA location for college, at Cornell, and then moved back, and then my now wife, and I met in LA, and then we moved to San Diego about 5 years ago. But no one else lives in San Diego, so our team's all over the country, and we've been supporting students all over the country for this entire time. So sometimes parents ask, like, with during this pandemic, like, are you supporting people remotely? I'm like, oh, we always have.
Always
So
have.
it's sort of been business as usual that way.
Awesome. So in general, how has the application process changed during COVID? Have you noticed last
Yeah.
year?
Yeah. So there are some like obvious changes that have been announced in a formal way, like schools going test optional, and then there are some that are sort of not really discussed, not official changes, and there are repercussions of certain changes and stuff like that. So there are a lot of layers to it. So for I guess the biggest, most obvious change has been, because of all these SAT and ACT cancellations, which I'm sure except a
For those.
ton about. All these schools went test optional, and then that brought up, well, this brings up a question now. Well, yeah, I know it's test optional, they say it's test optional, but is it really test optional? All these kids at my school have taken the exam, they've done it well. Is it expected of me, or do I have to drive to another state? If my state's closed, will it harm me? Basically, are there these tricks, are there these things that I don't know, that I must do? I think that's become the most obvious change. And then obviously the big announcement about the UCs basically not really looking at tests anymore. The SAT subject test moving forward won't be a thing, at some point. And so all of these questions about, which tests will even be in play in a year, in 2 years, if they are in play, how will they be used? Who needs to take them? Is optional really true? All that kind of stuff. That's on the testing side.
Yeah.
On the application side, the obviously we're like going through a cycle now. We found out with the early application process that Ivy League schools basically, I think all eight, if not seven of eight of them, basically had record number of applications. I think students, for whatever reason, might have just been applying more widely. Maybe they're anxious about um, a bunch of people who got in the year before had to decided to defer, so maybe schools aren't going to accept as many people, and so they thought they had to apply more widely. Or maybe they're just at home and they had more time, and they applied to more places. That could also be true. So acceptance rates, we shouldn't be shocked if they hit record lows, especially come we're
Yeah.
recording this in February excuse me, of 2021. So next month we'll find out those kinds of things as well. But then on the I guess day-to-day difference, in addition to schools being virtual and stuff, is extracurricular activities being, widely unavailable. Things that students plan to do and parents were hoping that their, students would do, are just not really in play anymore. Maybe summer programs got completely canceled, or they moved online. And parents ask me a lot of questions about, well, does it carry the same level of prestige if I do that same program but it's online? There isn't the same networking opportunity. Or maybe a student used to work with patients at a hospital or do research, but that, because they're not essential workers, maybe those opportunities are not available to them anymore. And so there are a lot of questions about, like, well, I had these plans, but these plans got derailed. Our college is going to be understanding of that, because I couldn't do them. It's not that I didn't want to do them, I just couldn't do them. How will that be? So I
Yeah.
think extracurriculars are the ones that just people are sort of feeling like wherever the wind takes them. When things open up, I'll do them. But there are students who, like in any other season of life, have taken the initiative and done amazing things. Maybe they had organizations that they took online and are impacting more people. Maybe they started new initiatives, during the pandemic, because they got really creative. So I think that some of the best students, they continue to rise to the top, And it just matters, when life, sort of the cliche saying, when life gives you lemons, like, what do you do with that, right? And some students are certainly making lemonade.
And I'm sure you've read some really amazing college essays based on this experience.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, and that comes up a lot too.
Yeah.
And I think this season reinforced the idea, and I'm sort of an evangelist of this. Is it's not there's no such thing as a good or bad essay topic, but rather only strong or poor execution, right? And I have so many students who said like, "Oh, like, do you think it'll be a good idea to write about the pandemic?" I'm like, what about the pen, how has it personally impacted, what are you going to say about it? So my question is always, what's the point? And I don't mean I don't say that in a in sort of an insulting way, like, what's the point of that? No, but actually, what's the point? What is it that you're trying to communicate? And sometimes students get stuck, I don't know, it's just hard, the pandemic. That's not good enough. But if you have something, a way it personally impacted you, an insight you developed, and it took you down a certain path, extracurricular, personally, and you want to talk about that, that could be good. So you had a lot of students who post-mortem would say, hey, I wrote about this, could you just look at it? Saw a lot of cliche essays, saw a lot of original essays. And it's funny, I feel like no matter what happens around us, sort of students fall into some of the same exact traps, and certain students take advantage of the opportunities available to them.
Absolutely. So, it's right now, it's like late winter, early springtime. Many students are getting college acceptance
Mhm.
and rejections. And you touched on it a little bit, but are you seeing yet a shift in the percentages of acceptances versus rejections, or has it stayed the same? Any trends there?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess anecdotally, our students continue to do very well. We had, numerous students who got into, their top choices, early decision, or early action, and things of that nature. So that's been wonderful. I will say that our students, on average, applied to more places, not because we were necessarily, nudging them to do that, but I think there was just more anxiety. I think people in general are just experiencing more anxiety about not only college admissions, but what will life look like next year, and all this kind of stuff. So they're
Sure.
trying to I guess widen their options. And so I guess based on that, depending how competitive or conservative a student was, their acceptance rates will vary, right? So if some student was very risk averse and they applied to a bunch more targets and safeties, well, they'll have more schools they got into than they otherwise would. Now, if they if they want to be extra competitive and apply to more schools at the top range, well, then their overall acceptance rate might be lower, but they'll probably increase their odds of getting into one of those top tier schools that they applied to. The thing that's still not clear to me is what's going to happen with financial aid. Schools got hit. We always think about just acceptance rates, but if people deferred, if schools lost money, school, not every school has a giant endowment like Harvard and Yale and Princeton. So how are they going to handle financial aid? We don't know that yet. So that's a wait and see for me, seeing how schools will navigate that.
Sure, makes sense. So when a student gets rejected from a school, um, is it game over for him or her? Or is there a chance to appeal? Can you talk a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, sure. So three things can happen when you apply to college and you're waiting for a decision. You can get accepted, you can get waitlisted, or you can get rejected. Um, and of course, if you're applying early, you can also get deferred to the regular admission cycle, at which point, again, you have those three options: accepted, waitlisted, or rejected.
Okay.
So accepted, you celebrate. Waitlisted, schools handle it differently. Some schools say, you don't have to do anything, just hang tight. We'll go down our list if and when spots open. They oftentimes don't tell you where you're ranked. They don't tell you if they go down a rank list. They don't tell you how many people on average they accept or they anticipate accepting. So
Yeah.
there's all that kind of stuff. Some schools invite you to submit a letter, like, if you're still interested, like, let us know. And they solicit waitlist letters, and then you could talk about fit. And then the appeal letters are for students who are just rejected. They say, thanks, but no thanks. Good luck. We had all these students who applied this year. We would love to give out more acceptances, but the reality is we have only so many spots. And most students will take that, and it's a bummer, and you sort of take it on the chin and you move on. But then if there is a school or two schools or three schools that you are really, really interested in, and especially bummed about, then you can submit what's known as an appeal letter. This is you essentially telling a school that they should reconsider you and why they should reconsider you. And there's a way to do it well, and there are ways to do it not so well. And just to sort of frame how tough it is to get in on appeal, schools don't really publish official numbers, but from what I've observed for many years now, pretty much less than 1% of people who appeal get in. So it's an uphill climb, but it's doable. We've had many students over the years successfully appeal.
Wow. Okay. So what are some ways to do it well and some ways to not do it well?
Yeah. So I'll start with the ways to not do it well. I'll talk about what appeal letters should be and what they shouldn't be, and then we'll talk about what it takes. So I'll talk a little bit about the typical experience that a student and a parent has when they don't get into a certain school, especially if they're their top choice. There's the shock, the disappointment. I always envisioned myself going to this place. It was my top choice. You might have a T-shirt or a sweater. It's like it's sort of like I had this plan and it like the chair was pulled out from under me. So there's that whole thing, and then almost like. And then there's a little bit of like anger, I think, that comes up. Like, God, like, what is it? What are they looking for? Like, I know it's hard, but like, come on, like I had this, and like I know this kid the year before got in, and they weren't as strong. Like, like what do they want? Like, I don't get it. There's that feeling that comes up a lot, and then there's the other like. They must have got something wrong. So the anger quickly turns into they must have got something wrong. I mean, did they really read that, Johnny was president of the aerospace club and that he did this thing over the summer? Like,
absolutely.
I feel like we should have written about that in the personal thing. So basically like that they must have missed it. I should have done the very hindsight bias. If I had only done X, it would have worked. If there wasn't this thing that happened, it would have worked. If the counselor had. So there's this like basically looking for answers, right? Trying to explain what the heck happened here. I don't know if when you're speaking with families, that's the sort of experience that you observe, but you got a 1540 and like, what do they want? They're top of the class, all this kind of stuff. But I think that at the end of the day, like, we like numbers and stats, like, oh, less than 5% of people get into Stanford. You go, man, that's really hard. And then, but when you don't get in, when it's personal, it's like, you don't care about the percentage. It's shocking because that wasn't supposed to happen to me. Right. There's that feeling. And so let's talk about, sorry for going off on that. I just want to sort of talk to families about what they might be experiencing and how that's normal and what you should do about it. Okay. So what an appeal letter isn't and what you shouldn't use it for. You shouldn't basically tell them they were wrong. Okay. Number one, don't say like, I can't believe like they're like I'm this, like you must have gotten it wrong. The schools, even a Harvard, a Yale, a Princeton, they can accept a whole different set of applicants and still have an amazing class. In other words, there truly are far fewer seats than there are people interested in seats, right? So that's a big thing. And so don't tell them they were wrong. Don't just repeat what you wrote in your application. So sometimes people, they'll have their activity section, they'll have their essays, all this kind of stuff. And they'll say, well, the activity section, didn't give me enough space to write about all this stuff. So I'm going to write about like what I actually did as, like the organizer for this thing, and basically like go into all those details and basically say like, look, if I tell you again, like Alexis, I was president freshman. No, I don't think you hear me. I was president of the. No, it doesn't matter if you're just repeating things that we already knew.
Right.
So that's what you really shouldn't do. Okay. What you can do are, I think they sort of fall into two. You should cover both of these things. Um, Something you didn't talk about that was very meaningful to you. Okay. And especially if you didn't, uh, like if it was like sensitive information you didn't want to talk about before, something like that. Um, Major updates since your application, which
Mm-hmm.
you could have totally actually provided to the schools, between the time you submitted your app and the when the decisions came out.
Yeah.
And then so those are the two sort of categories, and you should always then link it to the school. So you should always talk about something you didn't write before, or like barely touched on but is like critical to knowing you, or a major update. And then always make it like a why us essay, so demonstrate fit between you and the school. So what's an example of that? So sometimes students, let's say, have a uh, I don't know, let's talk like a mental health condition or something
Mm-hmm.
like that,
Sure.
and they didn't talk about it. They were bummed that maybe schools won't look at it, see it favorably. Maybe there's a bias, maybe there's some stigma. So they sort of, but it's critical to learning who they are. um that's the opportunity. Like, this is the time to really swing big, right? Folks who are baseball fans out there, like, if you swing big, you have a chance to hit a home run. You also have a chance to swing, miss horribly, basically. But you
Right.
have to really go. Like, this is not the time to hold back punches. You have
Sure.
to go for it. So let's say there's a student who had, some, mental health condition, or something like this, that is just so critical to understanding who they are, to contextualize their achievements and stuff like that. Well, this would be a time, and to really get personal about it. Like, this is actually what it's like to live like me. This is sort of the insight I've developed. Maybe even talk about, well, this is why I pursued this thing, this is why it's important. And then I'm going to take these experiences, and at your school there are opportunities like X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to do them. Look, like, this is what I bring to the table. So that would be like a big sort of reveal that maybe you didn't share before. Alternatively, maybe you were involved in some extracurricular, and you had some major achievement, like you were doing research on, I don't know, sea turtles or something like that. And all of a sudden, between the time you applied and the decision came out, maybe you got your paper accepted to some major journal, and you gave some presentation to some, I don't know, incredible environmental conference or something like that. And you tie that into something you're going to do at the school. And you might even get like an outside, an additional rec letter that you hadn't submitted before. And it's like, look, I'm continuing to achieve at this level, and your school's the perfect. These are the opportunities I'll take advantage of, and this is what I'll bring too. I think a lot of times we talk about in essays what the school can do for us. You have A, B, and C, and I want to do those things. We don't really talk about what we bring to the table. Like, this is what I can contribute, and your school is the perfect place to take advantage of that, and we can work together to do this, right? So that's another big one. So those are the two categories. And if you essentially write it as like a cover letter, but as an appeal, and you have to be very humble about it. You shouldn't be expectant in your letter.
Yeah.
And talk about, you should always also say stuff like, I know how, basically take out their, address their argument about there were too many seats and all that stuff. I recognize that you guys probably already admitted an insanely talented class, and as much as
Sure.
there's this thing of rejection, I understand, but here's why I would like you to reconsider. And then at the end, of course, thanking them for reconsidering, regardless of what happens. I think that humility also plays a role, because I've read a lot of drafts for appeal letters. They're not all humble. In fact, I would say probably half of them are pretty forceful about, you're wrong, here's why. Even if they think they're not saying that, that's the undertone.
Yeah, and that kind of goes with what maybe that defensiveness that you were talking about before. If you come from that place, that foundation where you think that they're they're against you, but then you might just kind of be overreacting and doesn't come across as humble.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the defensive thing is funny, even when, like I said, people sometimes don't think they're being defensive, but they are. And like, so, I mean, I can think of examples of like, if you start saying, yeah, and I also like, I had these basically regurgitating stuff that you had shared before, and I got a 1540. Did you know I had a 50? Basically, like,
Yeah.
even if you talk about all this stuff and then you say this combined with the fact that I had a da 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 da, I would ask you to basically, like, you got it wrong, and you're communicating that even if you don't say it
Absolutely.
directly. And so you have to be careful. And there are so many ways that people come across defensive or adversarial that they don't even realize.
Yeah. And just before we leave that topic, you as an admissions reader yourself, do people read these rejection letters? Like, is
They do.
100% it'll be a human being reading this if you send one in?
I mean, I don't know if there's a robot on the other side that I haven't met, but from what yeah, I mean, and you get responses. You get responses, and
Oh,
they'll
wow.
say no again, or they'll say yes. But and they also schools also often treat it differently. Like, I know at like certain UC schools, they might even say, like, basically, if you're gonna send anything else, send it between date A and date B.
Sure.
This is basically your window. You have to act quickly. So some schools will say, okay, starting on X date, you can submit any, if you're going to appeal, like, submit this. Others will not say that. So you have to just get it in quickly, because they're, again, filling in spots from their wait list and they're going down. So you want to act quickly. Other schools will say outright, like, we don't, this is final, like, don't, like, send anything else and all this kind of stuff. At that point, I mean, you can either say okay, or you can still send. I mean, at that point, you don't have anything to lose, I guess. And if you're very, humble and respectful and stuff like that, then I suppose there's no
Yeah.
real downside risk at that point.
So when you said, so before I said rejection, do they read rejection letters? I meant appeal letters, obviously, but is there a point where you're sending too much stuff? I always wonder this for myself, and they don't bother to read it, or is there going to be somebody always available on the staff to at least look at it, review it?
Yeah, I mean, so definitely for the main applications, right?
Yeah.
They read everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to your point, how about if you send? Here we go.
Oh, that's the thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
We'll be back.
Yeah. So I'll just start over my answer over. So yeah, when you send in materials to schools, they're all looked at. But you have to be mindful of, like you said, what's too much information, what's not relevant, what looks like you're just piling stuff on, because it really is a quality game and not a quantity game. Sometimes schools will say, we want 2 academic rec letters and 1 from your counselor, and but they leave it open-ended. And so people ask me, should I send 4th letter, 5th letter, 6th letter? And at some point you just got to cap it. And the way I make those decisions about, like, rec letters is, let's say you could grade a rec letter, an A, an A plus, an A minus, a B plus, all that kind of stuff. Go for the highest GPA for your rec letters. In other words, like, if the 5th rec letter brings your average down, stop sending stuff.
Great. Yeah, I like that.
And so that's one way to think about it. And then also, like in the activities section, it's like, well, I get 150 characters for this entry. Maybe I'll share a link to this manuscript I wrote, and they'll read the manuscript. And it's like, they're probably not going to read the manuscript.
Right.
So
Okay.
essentially, don't try to always get on these unfair. Now, in the additional information section, if there's something critical, like, look, I really just can't capture this activity in this way, it would be great if you can read just like the first, like, paragraph of this page or something. That's fine. So people read that stuff. As far as appeal letters go, again, in my experience, they get read. People get responses, and the fact that we've had numerous students who have gotten in after sending one, I suppose I have no reason to believe that they're not getting read.
Okay, that's helpful. Now, can you also appeal merit aid and other types of aid if you're not pleased with the package presented for you?
You can, yes.
Okay.
So there are numerous ways to do it. So sometimes if folks are familiar with like the price match idea, like if you go to Best Buy um, and uh, and you say, hey, look, but Target's selling it for $10 cheaper, can you match this price? And Best Buy
Yeah.
says yes. You can actually do do that at some schools. But you have to think about the similar caliber of school, right? So let's say I get
Sure.
into um, let me think. Let's say I get into Princeton, or
Okay.
well, that wouldn't make sense because there's no merit based aid. But a top school that
Top
has,
school.
yeah, a top school that has merit based aid, top 20 school, and they give you $10,000 a year.
Okay.
And there's a local private school that doesn't have the same. I live in San Diego. I'll go with University of San Diego. It's a fine school, but it's not of the same sort of prestige as that top 20 school. They offer you 40,000 a year. You
Okay.
wouldn't go to the top school and say, but USD offered me 40,000. That
40,000,
they're going to
right.
be like, well, yeah, because they're trying to recruit you because we have more of our pick, if you will, right? That's what the top school's thinking.
Yeah.
Now, if one top school is giving you 40,000 and the other one's giving you 10,000 a year and they're similar tiers, then you can say, hey, school A is actually giving me this amount, but I really want to go here. Essentially, could you match that? And again, there's a way to humbly ask for this kind of stuff, and it works. Oftentimes they do bump it up, or there might be information that they didn't consider. It's like, yes, my parents' tax return says this, but it was actually because like we sold this house that was passed down from my grandpa, and I don't know. And schools, I think, vary with respect to how they treat various situations. Financially, it can be complex. Or maybe since you filed your tax return, there was some major event, you lost something catastrophic, or whatever the case might be, or who knows, parental separations, and you're not supported the same way. There are all of these complicated kinds of things, but yes, you should certainly appeal merit aid if you feel like there's important information or you have a better offer. And if you don't have a better offer, well, then your sort of negotiation leverage isn't as strong, but you
Yeah.
can still do it.
Okay. So overall, it's good to ask nicely, whether it's just an appeal or
The great summary of today's conversation. If
Yeah.
you ask nicely,
Yeah.
nothing bad is
Right.
nothing bad is likely to happen. And then if you ask not nicely, well, something bad might happen.
Yeah, watch out.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it up for today, but what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah,
I'm
so
sure
you can
people
just
are
go.
gonna
Yeah, sure. Sorry to cut you off. So just go to the website, Shemmassian.com, and then /contact. Or if you go to the site, you go to the top right corner, you can reach out. There's a contact, or it's a contact@ShemmassianConsulting.com, but that's a long email address. So folks can just go to the site. I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes,
Oh yeah.
and just reach me directly. I think oftentimes people will reach out and I'll respond, and they'll say, "Oh wow, you respond." I'm like, "Yeah, I respond to everybody." So happy to chat with any families who have questions about the admissions process, appeals, everything in between.
Okay, perfect. And before we go, we have teens who listen to our show and they're listening to you now. Any advice as they get ready to cross that bridge from teenage to young adulthood?
Teenage to young adulthood.
Yes, it's a big jump.
Hang in
on
there.
Their own. Hang in there.
Hang in there. I feel like that's appropriate during this season of the world. There are so many changes and so many unknowns. But even if in a world, in a non-pandemic world, there are a lot of changes. You might move away from home, new friend group, new challenges, stuff like that. So hang in there. I always look back on when I was 18, 20, 25, all this kind of stuff, and there are a lot of stuff that I thought, happening in my life back then that were these huge things like, oh my gosh, but when you get to the other side and you get older, you realize, most of the time, most things will be okay. So hang in there.
Love it. Dr. Shemmassian, thanks again for coming on the show. Really value your input.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Alexis.
And this wraps up our show today. This was episode number 250. with Cornell admissions interviewer and admissions consultant Dr. Shirag Shemmassian. To work with Shirag, go to Shemmassianconsulting.com. I'm going to spell that. It's SHEMMASSIAN consulting.com. And make sure to go back to podcast number 152, where I speak with Shirag about evaluating your college application. To access all of our podcast episodes, you can do that two ways. You can go to preppedandpolished.com/podcast. You'll find it right away. Or you can go to soundcloud.com/preppedandpolished and find it there. Thanks for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.
You've been listening to the Prepped and Polished podcast. For more information, check out preppedandpolished.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.